All right. And with that, I'm excited to introduce you to today's expert presenters. They are Mr. Rob Simopoulos, co-founder at Defendify, Mr. Seth Bailey, Vice President of Information Security at Iron Mountain, and Jenna Wells, Director of Third-Party Risk Management, also at Iron Mountain. Rob, Seth, and Jenna, it's great to have you on the event today.
Thanks for having us. Appreciate it.
All right. Well, before I hand it off to you, Rob, just one quick poll question. I want to ask everyone out there in the audience. It's a simple yes or no question, and that is, have you ever received the cybersecurity questionnaire from an important customer?
I'm really interested to see what this number looks like.
Absolutely. Yeah, me as well. So everyone out there, if you haven't answered one of these polls before, you just select the answer there in your slides window. Should be a quick yes or no. Rob, maybe you could give us an example of when you say cybersecurity questionnaire, what are the types of things that these ask and when do they typically come?
Yeah, well, we're going to talk a little bit more about that today with Seth and Jenna. But what we're seeing happening is that small and mid-sized organizations today are getting questionnaires from their customers, asking them about what their cybersecurity looks like. And really, there's a lot of reasons, which we're going to discuss further, but mainly in regards to the fact that these enterprise organizations realize that these vendors that they're doing business with are storing their sensitive data or have access to sensitive resources, quite often IT resources, and they want to make sure that things are going to be protected accordingly.
Excellent. All right, well, let me go ahead and share the results now. Rob, looks like 40% roughly have received these and roughly 59% haven't. What's your take on that?
I think I guessed a little bit around that range. That would probably be around the 50-50 mark. We're definitely seeing this number starting to grow. So the ones who have not seen that yet, I think by the time we're done the conversation here, I think you're going to understand that you're probably going to expect that it's going to be happening anytime. And it's probably time to prepare. Seth, Jenna, would you agree?
Absolutely.
All right.
All right. Well, take it away, Rob.
All right, let's get started. So to begin with, I think the first place we should begin is let's begin with having each of you maybe explain who you are and what you do. But to just kick off with, why don't you tell us a little bit about Iron Mountain and the business itself? Jenna, do you want to take it?
Yeah, absolutely. So Iron Mountain is a global information management company that stores, protects, and manages the information of our customers. We're located in 50 plus countries, and we are a customer and a client of most Fortune 1000 companies. So very, very wide array of services and also a very, very wide array of locations, which makes us applicable, as Seth is going to go into a little bit later, global regulations and a lot of different things we need to think about. So I think that's what we just want to focus on, very robust company, lots of global locations, and information storage and management is our business.
Right. And that includes physical and data, right, that you're trying to store and protect.
It does. I'm sure everyone's really familiar with the trucks riding around in every major city, every small town, but we have a very large digital footprint as well that's been escalated, obviously, in the pandemic. So information and data management.
Okay, great. Thanks for the overview. Seth, are you back with us and connected in?
I'm back. I don't know what happened. It just stopped working.
All right, we're here. So why don't you start out, Seth? Tell us about your role at Iron Mountain. What do you do on a daily basis? What does your team comprise of? And I know that you're not just taking care of the vendor assessment side of things, that it expands from there.
Absolutely, yeah. So I oversee the governance, risk, and compliance organization at Iron Mountain. Consists of roughly 30 people around the globe, as well as a handful of contractors, give or take, depending on what we're up to. Overall guidance, or overall, I guess, coverage here. So I've got the third-party risk team, which Jenna runs for me. I've got the compliance team, which, for those that are familiar with the certifications and attestations, the SOC 1, SOC 2, ISO 27001, PCI, FISMA, pretty much we have to do them all for what we do for a business. I also do the opposite of the third-party risk, the inbound. So we have a team that's dedicated, which we'll talk about more later on in this presentation, about the team that actually manages all the inbound requests from our customers' risk teams. And then from there, lastly, kind of the foundational piece, which is the policies and governance. We own that piece as well. So we help drive the overall global policies, standards, documentation, and then risk assessments that is kind of goes in line with that assesses our not only our program, but also our applications to how we're meeting our policies and standards.
Great.
And then,
thanks for the sorry.
I can do a quick intro for Jenna too. So I brought Jenna with me. Jenna just gave the intro for Iron Mountain. Thank you. Jenna runs day-to-day operations. I mean, she's the the brains behind the third-party risk management team at Iron Mountain.
Great. And for both of you have phenomenal backgrounds. That's not digital backgrounds. That's real background. Where are you located?
So I am currently sitting in Boston, in the financial district right now. With the this isn't a fake view. This is actually I know we all have fake views these days, but this is actually looking out the window of the office. Nice,
great spots. All right, so where I want to start is just talking about the GRC side, which Seth you mentioned. You lead up, and Jenna's the brains behind the operation, as you described her to be. Tell us a little bit about what exactly that team is doing. Maybe Jenna, you can take this for a second. Like, what's your team doing on a daily basis in regards to looking at vendors and assessing them and understanding if they have the right things in place? Can you just go into a little bit of detail so that everybody understands what your group is doing?
Yeah, absolutely. So I would say definitely no day is the same, but we do have an overall framework, and strategic roadmap that we do follow. But our main goal and job is to assess the risk of outsourcing any operations. So, we say that you can outsource the function, but you can't outsource the risk. So anytime that Iron Mountain is contracting with a third party, we are responsible for vetting that third party, classifying that third party, giving that third party a risk designation, and then also working with the applicable subject matter experts throughout the firm to ensure that we're mapping to all the standards and regulations and that our third parties are adhering to all the Iron Mountain standards. And just to back up a little bit, when I say subject matter experts, we liaise very frequently with the information security teams, the business continuity and disaster recovery, the teams responsible for the contracting process, which includes legal, compliance, as well as procurement. I would say procurement's our biggest partner, and they're probably look at me as their biggest enemy, but I think they're my biggest partner. Absolutely, we're very dependent on them in really classifying and mitigating that risk. So I have a full-time team of 5, 6 including myself. I have 2 senior analysts that focus really on the assessment piece, so that's sending questionnaires to our vendors and then receiving those questionnaires back and mapping them to our standards to identify residual risk and mitigating that risk. I have 1 full-time dedicated data integrity analyst. As we spoke about in the overview, Iron Mountain is in 50 plus countries, and that's a lot of outsourcing. So we have someone completely dedicated to ensuring our data remains current and up to date in our systems and is also talking to the other systems. And then I have 1 analyst that we say is a supplier relationship management analyst. So that's SLA management, being that liaison between procurement and really ensuring that we're looking at it more than just third party and just holistic vendor management.
So the basic fundamentals are, if you're going to provide services to Iron Mountain, you're at some point going to start to engage with the procurement team in negotiating that contractual arrangement. And then in comes your team to start to assess to ensure that this vendor has, things up where they should be, just on the cybersecurity side and info security, or what else is involved in that?
Absolutely. So definitely the procurement's usually the first step, and then it gets triaged to our team as appropriate, before the contract is signed, executed, to ensure that we mitigate and identify any risk. But information security is a very large piece, and I want to bring the data and the privacy into that as well, because information security now is protecting your data, as we also discussed during the intro. So, protecting personal information, whether it be for a US citizen, an EU citizen, wherever your global location is, there's a lot of implications and a lot of things that need to be done to protect that data. So we work very closely with our global privacy and compliance teams to ensure that based on that vendor's location, we are mapping and ensuring the appropriate controls. And then business continuity, disaster recovery, we're very concerned with, I would say, day 1 critical. And we classify our vendors on a low, medium, and high risk scale. And a lot of different things go into that classification. Information security and data privacy is weighted the most, but we're also concerned with physical security and disaster recovery and business continuity. So if you go down, can we still operate? Because we SLA management, our customer requirements. So we're liaising with all of those different risk areas and then all of those applicable subject matter experts at Iron Mountain to assess those areas from the vendors.
The disaster recovery is really interesting because we were working with a small mid-sized manufacturer, and they told me a story about how their supplier was hit with ransomware, and it like shut down their entire manufacturing plant, and the supplier could no longer supply them the things that they needed to produce, what they build for their customers. And they had a huge struggle. They had to figure out who was going to supply that. Next thing you know, they had to find a new supplier. And it was interesting. I asked the question, so are you going to go back to that previous supplier? And they said, no, now we've engaged with a new supplier. So I think you're spot on with that. The disaster recovery side. Seth, I know you've been at Iron Mountain for a long time, and we just did a poll to see how many people, have actually received questionnaires. How long has this type of thing been happening in the industry, this assessing your vendor? Is this a relatively new thing that's happened, a year ago, or how long has it been around for?
So I've been here at Iron Mountain for 15 years, and I'd say about 10 years ago, it was really primarily amongst the financial institutions. They were probably at the forefront of sending questionnaires around, primarily, well, amongst themselves as well, but to their highest risk vendors. I think that was probably the initial mark that I saw, right? I mean, I'm sure they were doing this prior to that, but it really started about 10 years ago, and it was really kind of informational requested with questionnaires, less about today where they do audits and they send contractual language, that sort of thing. But about 10 years ago, it really started with questionnaires being formed. They all had their own. From there, it's really grown, I'd say, exponentially to not only the banks, but now to all big industries. And now it's starting to trickle into areas that we're talking about today with, smaller to moderate sized businesses where, it's a pass through. So I think what's really driving it, outside of folks just trying to have good security at their firms and trying to take care of their firms and their customers' data, but it's really a pass through from the top. And I'd say the top being the biggest customers, the biggest, biggest industries, as well as the government and regulatory. And it's just flowing downhill through all the vendors, through all the companies like ourselves. We obviously want to protect our customers' data, and we take security very seriously. So a lot of the things we may have already been doing, but in terms of overall holding vendors accountable and having contractual language, holding our vendors accountable and ensuring that we're validating and doing, all the new steps and all the new, I say criteria, that's some's new, some's just being enforced, and some's now broadening across the industries. I'd say it continues to grow every year. We went from having a few hundred a year to now truly thousands, where it was, again, there was certain groups and certain companies that were always at the top of the line with everything, the biggest budgets, the biggest teams, that sort of thing, highest regulated. But now it's just flowing through all the different industries. It doesn't really matter what you do or what you provide. It's going to eventually get there. It's just a matter of when.
Yeah, I agree with you. Here's one of the first questions I want to understand, and I think that a lot of the people who are on the webinar with us are going to want to understand as well. Like, how do you determine if you are going to perform a cybersecurity assessment on a vendor or not? What does that process look like internally? How do you decide? How do you rate them? Yeah, Jenna, you said that there's a high, a medium, and a low sort of rating that comes along with that. Like, before you even engage with them to start the assessment, what's the first stage that happens in your group there?
Sure. I think, even taking a step back from that is what's your vendor population? I think you first need to have a holistic and really inclusive view of your entire vendor population. And, for example, we did a big project a few years ago with the accounts payable team at Iron Mountain. So we pulled a full spend report, to really see, okay, this is every single vendor that we are paying and operating with. So let's understand our vendor population and let's take a risk-based approach. No matter the size of your company, none of us can boil the ocean, and you really need to understand your biggest risk and focus on those vendors first. So we personally have a couple of triggers that will always necessitate a cybersecurity assessment, or really any assessment. I'll just call it a security assessment. And our big triggers are access to internal Iron Mountain or customer data, or
Okay.
BCDR day one critical. So if you have access to our data, our customers' data, or you are a BCDR critical vendor, you are going to receive an assessment from us. We also follow, kind of to get a little more granular, a trust but verify method. So when I say assessment, we might be sending you a questionnaire, in addition to asking for any supplemental attestation documentation. And Seth alluded to earlier, he manages the other side of that for the Iron Mountain team, because we produce our own SOC 2 and applicable PCI certification. So we're going to be asking for those from our vendors as well to see if an independent auditor has come, depending on obviously the services that you're providing. But access to data is the biggest trigger right now. And then usually with access to data, there may be some integration with internal Iron Mountain systems. The information security and the cyber piece, there are so many softwares as a service that are available now. And we need to ensure not only are they protecting our data and where is our data housed, but are they going to safely interact with other applications in the internal Iron Mountain network? So there's a lot of things going on behind the scenes, but I would say the focus is absolutely on data.
Oh, excellent. And so and not that I want you to name like tools or technology or a specific brand, but you do utilize technology tools to start to bubble up the vendors specifically that you need to perhaps perform these assessments on. Maybe Seth, you can touch on that for a second, if you don't mind.
So we do use automation. We've had a couple different solutions over the years. I'd say we've stuck with one for the longest amount of time. I just don't want to name them just in case. But it definitely helps. I think trying to get your arms around this with just people and just trying to throw money at it is a battle you just can't win. It would take you forever. Not a lot of companies are going to have that sort of financial backing for just this program. I mean, there's so many different programs within information security that you need to focus on. So having that automation, whether it be through sending the questionnaire or doing some of the early on requests, that they can then come back and formulate that for you so that you have the limited people or resources that you may or may not have are focusing on the most critical things. And they're really evaluating the results that come back that you care about most versus, sifting through, Excel documents or Word files or whatever form you have to either send or get back, depending on how you're doing it. You don't want to waste a lot of your critical manpower going through just paperwork. You want to focus on the risk. Focusing on the risk is the most important part, and ensuring that your vendors are where you need them to be, or if they aren't there, you have a plan with them to ensure that they get there. And so anything you can do to automate, whether it be through basic technologies, through Office or any sort of different analysis items that you can pull in through like an Access database, or things through Excel, or things through the Google Suite, or anything you can do that you already have access to, that's great, and that'll be a low cost option. But otherwise, if you have enough money, or you can get the budget support, getting a system that can automate this for you is going to be critical to the success of the program.
Got it. Great. Thank you. So using technology tools to identify which vendors specifically you want to really focus in on from a cyber assessment perspective. And if they're a new vendor coming in and they're in the procurement process, they're going to get, asked immediately to ensure that they're going to meet those requirements. So what I want to understand a little bit more is, and I've seen it come in a variety of fashions, but we are seeing small and mid-sized companies today receiving questionnaires and assessments from larger entities that are basically asking them what their cybersecurity program looks like. And it's really detailed, but the most common thing that we see and we're hearing from people we're working with is it's an Excel spreadsheet that arrives, and they have to start filling in and answering the questions and so on. Maybe you can share some different ways, Jenna, on how these assessments are performed. Is it usually a questionnaire-based spreadsheet that is common in the industry, or how does that work?
Yeah, absolutely. I would say that's definitely the most common in the industry. So that's what we use. There's a lot of tools out there. Seth spoke to automation. There's a lot of tools that will automate the Excel document. So most of it is based either homegrown or industry standard in the Excel document, and then that can be automated through a SaaS or an internal application. But most of those are going to be questionnaire based. So that's really the foundation of ours. Is an Excel-based questionnaire. But again, we do that trust but verify method. Depending on the services that you're providing to us, we're going to ask you to fill out that questionnaire, but then maybe we're going to ask you as well to provide some other documentation from an independent source to verify those answers. And we're also very, very open in understanding that this is a big lift for a small to mid-sized company, a massive lift. And a lot of those tabs are not going to be applicable. There's 167 plus conditional questions on our specific questionnaire that that we send out, and that has been significantly pared down from the initial questionnaire. So we're very open to getting on the line with the applicable information security teams at our vendors and talking through it. That's something that we really push, and we've seen, a lot of people are very hesitant to call our team and think we just want to receive the questionnaire back. We'd much rather get through and set up a meeting and talk to the additional subject matter experts at the companies on their posture, on their plans. Are they working towards an attestation document like a SOC 2 or an ISO certification? And that's definitely helpful for our team to know. It's not an automatic, you don't have this document, so you can't be our vendor. But we really want to understand your posture and your strategic roadmap for full information security, I would say health or compliance.
Great. There's some questions already rolling in on this specific topic, so I'll ask you, Jenna, quickly. So someone's asking like, how do you validate the accuracy of the security assessment that the vendor sends back? Do you just trust that information? They're actually asking it from the perspective of themselves, which we're going to get into in a second. But maybe it comes down to what you shared as an attestation. Can you just touch a little bit more on that? Like, how do you validate that?
Yeah, absolutely. It's a great question. And again, I'll go back to our focus is really going to be on those vendors that have access to or are storing our data. And then where is that data being stored? So we see a lot of times, and it's quite frequent, that they'll provide us a SOC report or an attestation document of their cloud service provider or their hosting provider or their data center. So they can show that that's an independent documentation and an audit report of where our data is being housed. So I think that all comes back to just have the conversation. We're going to review every single line of every single question that you send. We have automated tools that run it against our preferred response list. So we'll be able to see within 10 seconds if any of your answers deviate from our standards. And that's really what garners more questions. We're going to go back to the internal procurement and business contact that's looking to onboard this service and ask them to set up a meeting with the external vendor contact to talk through these deviations and how we can mitigate them moving forward. But we do see quite frequently attestation documents from the hosting provider. That's something that's really growing in the industry, and we do accept that because, again, we really care about the controls around where our data is being housed.
Yeah, it totally makes sense. I think your point's really valid, and we try to share that with people as well. It's like when you receive that questionnaire, don't feel like it's a conflicted relationship where you just fill it in and shoot it back and hope it's the best. First off, you should never just lie on those things because that could come around to really be a bad situation. You want to answer them honestly, but at the same time, you can open up a conversation with the customer and have a conversation about why am I getting this assessment? For what reason? How should we go about fulfilling the needs? Do you agree, Jenna? It sounds like you support that, right?
Absolutely. I would say we almost prefer that.
Right.
And I say to my team all the time, don't shoot an email back, just give someone a call, because it's a very, very long endeavor. And, again, especially for these small to mid-sized companies, we understand it might take 3, 4, 5 people at your company to fill out one questionnaire for us. So we want to make it worth your time and just really understand the security posture.
Right. And someone's asked another question here. For your risk assessments, do you come up with a vulnerability score for those specific vendors? You mentioned high, medium, low. Can you share a little bit on that?
Absolutely. So again, Seth alluded to the automated system, and in our repository that houses all of our global third parties, we actually have back-end logic built into that will auto-calculate a low, medium, or high score, depending on how the information is filled out in what we call our inherent risk profile. So this is a set of demographic questions broken down at the engagement level. And I want to make that distinction pretty clear between the vendor level and the engagement level, because you can have multiple engagements with one vendor that all bring a unique aspect or different aspect of risk. I'll use Google, for example. You could use G Suite at Google, you could host in GCP, and then you could also use another subset of Google. And all of those Google relationships are independent and bring a different amount of risk to the firm. So we classify and track our vendors down to the engagement level, and we have about 15 qualifying questions that we ask encompassing of information security, data privacy, physical security, and disaster recovery within that inherent risk profile. And then based on your access to data, your access to Iron Mountain sites or customer sites, and again, that BCDR day one, that'll calculate a low, medium, or high weighted score. And then from there, we'll take a risk-based approach in what assessment packet, I'll say, we send our vendors.
Excellent. Amazing the lengths you're going to protect the company and your customers as well. I wanted to touch on another topic, which I'm seeing trending quite a bit, which is not only are there cybersecurity requirements coming through questionnaires and these assessments, but now it's also tying you into a legal security agreement as well, so you may be signing through procurement a document saying you can be our vendor and you agree to these terms, but inside of that, it's detailing the security things that you must have in place in order to do business with the organization. Seth, can you talk for 2 seconds just on this? Because I've seen this starting to grow a little bit as well, where people are going to be held legally around that.
Absolutely, yeah. So actually, just to wrap up the last point too, Rob, I just want to add a couple of points there. So in terms of the relationship with your customer, in terms of you receive that questionnaire and you get nervous or you don't know what to do with it. Another way to look at it as well, which is more positive, is you're receiving that. It could be a generic questionnaire, it could be a generic request. There's a good chance, depending on who sent that to you from the company, they might not even know what you are going to be doing for them. And right. So think of it as a benefit to both sides, where you're now going to talk with them and you'll have the right folks on the line to really scope that questionnaire, to scope that information request, because the last thing you want to do is just fill it all out, not applicable, because then it looks like you're hiding something. But once you decide and you have a mutual agreement on what exactly you're providing and the business you're actually providing to them and what types of information you may or may not have access to or what types of work you may be doing, it might save you both a lot of time. And it'll definitely save you that headache up front when you first look through the questionnaire and you might see, 2,000 questions. Many of them may not be relevant for you. And so I think just to follow up on that last piece, it's definitely worth talking with the folks at the customer. So
there might be an assumption that they're going to have access to specific data, and they're like, we don't want access to that data. That's not what our job is. It's not what we're going to be providing services for. Is that what you're saying along those lines?
Exactly. You might be being asked something that's completely out of left field it's not even relevant to what you do for a service, or maybe it is, and maybe you just want to talk through different ways of how you're solving that problem versus how the question was worded. There's always ways around it. So you always, not in a negative way, there's not ways around it like you're trying to cheat the system, but ways around it in terms of working as a partner with your customers. Look at it as a partnership versus you're getting asked and now you're freaking out about how to provide the answers. That's all.
Right. So, okay. So let's go to the next topic, which is the legal agreement side. Is this happening?
Absolutely. So how I talk about this typically when I'm talking about resource management here and trying to get additional help for the work that's coming in is if you look back to what I talked about earlier about 10 years ago, where it was primarily the big financial institutions sending out these massive questionnaires. Well, now it's evolved into not only will you receive questionnaire, but in some cases that questionnaire is now being replaced with a questionnaire which has been converted into a security addendum. And so they take the questions and their risk questions and what they're looking for from your profile, and they're converting that into a minimum security standard or a minimum requirement. There's many different words and ways to think about it, but it's basically, think of the questionnaire converted into a contract term, and they're going to hold you accountable to that. And then you need to be able to ensure that you're not signing up for something that you can't do, but also understand what you're reading, because a lot of times it won't necessarily make sense to everybody that's receiving it. So the legal team, for example, they're used to seeing different T's and C's and different requirements and liabilities and that sort of thing. They're not going to necessarily be equipped, rightfully so, to be able to answer in an educated way how the security program is today and what the maturity is. Or just an example, maybe there's language in there about penetration testing. Well, if you're not providing a service that's relevant for, you want to strike that, right? You want to redline that. You want to get that out of there. Now, is it really a big risk if you leave it in there? I guess that's up to the customer to decide, but typically you don't want to have things that you're contractually obligated to that aren't relevant. And so that seems to be the new trend for sure. It's getting to be much more than it was. I mean, we receive probably 10 times as many now as we did 2 years ago. And so it is the evolution of the questionnaire. That's how I look at it. It's the questionnaire was the beginning. that worked, it checked the box, but now that box check exercise doesn't work, and you really need to have your contract in place to really secure your information and ensure that you're covered. Because, like you said before, you would hope that the questionnaires are being filled out properly and they're being filled out honestly. But a lot of times, the folks filling them out may not know what they're filling out, or they may not be properly equipped to fill it out. And now it's converted. It's kind of got up a level where it's really around ensuring that you're contractually obligated, or you have a contract in place to secure you with your vendors, which then will have liability and other things associated with it. So now you're tying in, that cyber information security piece.
Oh, right. Yeah, I think that there's a couple things to think about if you're a small or mid-sized company. The first one is when you get these questionnaires coming across, and they're going to come. I think that majority of businesses are going to be asked by their customers what their cybersecurity looks like. We're living in a data world. It's going to happen. You need someone on your team who's going to have the capability of having a conversation with someone like Jenna or the people on Jenna's team and be able to communicate accurately about the things that you have in place from a cybersecurity perspective, or have attestation in regards to a report from a third-party audit. But now, with the security addendum being attached to this as well, this is a legal contractual obligation. And whereas, traditional business attorneys, and sometimes even just inside of the company, you may have, some form of a person playing legal counsel who can review the standard business agreement and look for the key things. Now you're getting this security addendum that has a lot of really detailed questions about your cybersecurity practices. And most, general counsel don't have the skill sets to even understand what half of those things mean. So I think it means that for small to mid-sized organizations, you're going to need to start considering that you need a data security attorney to possibly review these agreements for you as well, because there will be things in there. So I think it's evolving and changing. I think it's all for the good. I think that everybody needs to take the right steps and start to protect themselves, from what you guys are doing all the way to the people providing the services. But there's definitely a shift here. I think this comes down to my next question, which it sounds like is the case, but I'll let both of you confirm. But, can we sit here and say, yeah, organizations, enterprise organizations are selecting their vendors based on their cybersecurity posture? Would that be an accurate statement? Maybe I'll pass it to Jenna, see what her thoughts are on that.
Oh, I was going to say, you're going to let Seth take this first. No, yeah, I would say, we're selecting, that is a major, if not the most important selection criteria. I think I'll word it like that. That is the biggest piece that we look for, and it is the heaviest weighted criteria that we look for when evaluating, and then also when continuing with vendors. Because I do have that SRM analyst, we partner with procurement, and we're also looking to update our contracts if anything's up for renegotiation, or if we're changing or expanding services. We're also going to add that additional language for cybersecurity posture as ours has evolved as well.
Right. So Seth, maybe over to you and see what your thoughts are.
I mean, it absolutely is going to impact whether or not you do or don't get the business. Now, whether it be, it's not as black and white as yes or no, you don't get the business or you do, depending on how you answer the questionnaire. But typically what will happen is we're going to have a conversation with you, and we're going to contractually obligate you, right? We're going to hold you accountable to meet certain deliverables. So if you don't necessarily have exactly what we need on day one, which, I don't want to say no one does, but no one's got the best. Not every vendor out there has the best security program, right? It's just not realistic. And so what a lot of programs will do is they'll work with the vendor, or in our case, we work with customers to put those overall security controls in place, and you get timelines and milestones, and you're held accountable to those, and you have regular check-ins. And so, but it will impact whether or not you do or don't get the business, especially if you're not willing to invest in it and you're not willing to put more effort into that program, kind of going forward. Then it absolutely won't be long term.
Yeah,
I can add one more point to that. My team does track the status. Anytime that we're onboarding or we're working with a vendor and they say we're expecting in let's say Q3, Q4 to have this document or this attestation done. We track all of that, and we will reach back out, and that will be another conversation if it isn't done. So we actually have an internal system to ensure that we're reaching out on those timelines as identified by our vendors. And it's a whole different conversation if those attestations are not completed by then.
Oh, so if they're saying they're going to get an attestation and it's roadmapped, you're going to follow up and ensure that that's in place. Yeah.
We are. Thank you. That's the perfect word, the roadmap. Mm-hmm.
Yeah, the roadmap. There's another question that someone posed in the same thing, which I think comes along this line, is saying, like, if we didn't score well in our assessment, and maybe we did put some NAs in there, or we are going to get these things in place, it sounds like you will give them a little bit of a grace period to get, depending on the control that you're looking at, but you will give them a little bit of grace period, but you're going to follow up, right? I think that's
we are, and I would say, I don't necessarily look at it as a pass fail. You either meet our requirements at the onset, or we're not going to give you all of the business from a data privacy perspective, right? So it's, you're not, an NA doesn't necessarily mean fail. And Seth said this earlier, which is why we really want to have a conversation to ensure that we understand exactly the services that you're providing to us, because not all of them may be applicable to all of our standards. So as long as we understand those services, and you say NA to, maybe your mobile device management, if we are not going to be using any services that are going to touch any of the mobile devices for your company, that NA answer is absolutely fine. So I wouldn't be concerned with NA answers as long as they're not applicable to the services that we're contracting you for.
So NA with the mitigating control as to why maybe it's not going to be stored there and so on, and putting that details in there totally makes sense. All right, let's go to the next one. So I think we addressed this a little bit already. If you're a smaller mid-sized company, and we just saw the percentages, of people who have never received a cybersecurity assessment, what do you feel is like the first things that they should do when they receive this whole thing? The first thing, I'll make 2 quick points. Don't lie. Okay. You should really be reviewing this and reassessing yourself. And, these are things that, every company today should have in place. A lot of the controls that are being asked are basic cybersecurity hygiene things that organizations should have in place. But let me hand it over to you folks. We'll start with Seth first. Where should they begin?
So first, take a deep breath and review it. Understand kind of what's being asked, right? So I think I mentioned earlier, you want to make sure that it's scoped appropriately. So if you receive the generic request that every single other vendor of this customer is receiving, and it's just across all the broad spectrum of controls, there's a good chance that a lot of them aren't applicable to what you're going to be providing to that customer. And so first thing is review it, understand internally, in case you're not completely clear on what you're actually providing. If you have many different services that you provide, make sure you understand what this one is for, so you're not answering it on behalf of other services. Or on the flip side of that, maybe you want to answer it more holistically, because maybe there's going to be a lot more upside with that customer, and you could then provide other services that you don't have to go through this process again. So there's many different ways of looking at it in terms of that. But I think the first thing is definitely scope the questionnaire, make sure that you understand what's being asked. As we talked about earlier, like you said, Rob, we mentioned this earlier, but any questions or concerns or any sort of confusion, absolutely reach out to the customer. It's going to only help both sides. One, they're going to understand more of what you're doing, because there's a good chance, right? The experts on their side may not even be aware that you're even in the queue. You probably got the request from some sort of onboarding team or procurement team or whomever it came from. It was probably part of their checklist, right, to onboard a vendor. And so once you get to talk to the experts on the other side, you might get a better understanding of why they're asking, or they might get a better understanding of why it's not relevant. And so you can really help the process along. But I think also once you get good at that, and once you start understanding what's being asked of you and why, kind of that internal ingestion. So once you get it, don't hold on to it. So there's a good chance the person or persons that receive it may not have all the answers. But if you just wait and try to answer your pieces, and then you kind of kick it down the road to the next person, whether it be the IT person or the HR person or what the business continuity person, all the different domains in that questionnaire, it's going to take forever to turn it around. And that's not good either, because then your customer is going to get frustrated. They may have multiple vendors in the queue, and you may lose out on time, right? So you might lose for the wrong reasons. And so it's really important to have some sort of triage where once you understand what's being asked, immediately get it out to the various stakeholders so that it can be answered in a quick, expedited way and turn back around. So, in general, in most cases, it's part of the RFP process. So, like anything else, you want that RFP going back, ASAP. So, but obviously, like you mentioned earlier as well, you want it to be honest and truthful. So, those are really the two big things. What we've tried to figure out and really get ahead of is how do we do it in the most expedited way? One, understand what's being asked, and two, get it to the right people early. So it's not a, top to bottom from every group. And then everyone, then you got to figure out how to consolidate it all. And you've got different fonts and different it just becomes a mess. So it's really important to get it distributed to the various parties, because there's a good chance it's not going to be just one person that's going to have the answer for all the stuff.
Right. Yeah. If you're in the middle of the procurement process, they may be looking at multiple vendors. You might be the first pick, but if you're not going to get the documents back quickly, you might just move on to the next one who gets it in a quick. Jenna, anything to add to that as well?
I would just add that it also helps to have customer-ready documentation, whether it be, your security white paper or an overview of your entire security posture, to send that preemptively, early on in that RFP or that process for onboarding. And we're obviously going to review all of that as well. We're not solely looking at that questionnaire, we're looking at the entire spectrum of available documentation, and that absolutely, we take that into account when holistically reviewing that service. So any customer ready and facing documentation that you already have available, I would say to preemptively send that to the third party team and the applicable procurement contact, because that will definitely get the ball rolling on our side much faster.
Yeah, it's actually interesting. It's one of the things that we talk to our customers a lot about, is that if you do have really great cybersecurity hygiene and you're doing all the things that you feel like you should be doing, you're doing it the best that you can, you should be promoting that to your customer base and promoting it to new customers you want to do business with. It can really separate you from the competition who maybe has never filled out a cybersecurity assessment and doesn't have those controls in place. I think that there is some ways that, and maybe you just shared one, which is a great point, is already get it prepared. But what are some of the ways that a small or mid-sized person or organization can be prepared for when this cybersecurity assessment arrives? Like you just shared, maybe have that white paper prepared, documented the best that you can, that could be shared with a new customer you do business with. Any other thoughts on here that would make the transaction a lot easier between a vendor and your group, perhaps?
I would say, early onset or even before engaging with a firm like Iron Mountain, identify who should be at the table. Because I think that's what we see a lot. It's so much time is, I don't want to say wasted, but spent even identifying who should be filling out the questionnaire that we send. So if you identify the applicable, we call them SMEs or subject matter experts here, but who runs this department? Do you have a chief counsel? And if not, who's your legal representative? Who runs your IT department? So I would say, meet them and almost form a working group. That's what we have here. And we work with those subject matter experts quite frequently to ensure that, first, we're staying up to date on our preferred responses, but also at any time, if my team has a question, because we're not subject matter experts in everything, we just go directly to that SME, and they're available to discuss and make recommendations. So I think just identifying internally who the right people to be at the table, for lack of a better term, I think that will save a lot of time on the back end. And, as your cybersecurity posture and your information security hygiene grows, that table will probably grow, which is a good thing. Because, we say all the time, everyone should be taking a risk-based approach now. And that's, I feel like, a big buzzword that I say all the time, whether it be to procurement or the business or really any customer or vendor I talk to. We think everyone should have a risk-based mindset. How can we protect our data, protect the firm, and then, really protect our vendor as well? So if you really educate and I would say adopt that mindset, everyone's going to be ready to fill kind of these risk positions.
Right. If an organization has gone through the whole attestation process, they've got a SOC 2 report or an ISO certification, something along those lines, does it make it easier if they send that over to you, like in the initial beginning of the conversation?
I would say it helps. It's definitely something that we're going to look at. And if you do have access, I know I'm a broken record, but with the data access, if you have access to our data or our systems, we're absolutely going to want to see that. And we're personally going to do a full mapping to NIST. So if you are a high-risk vendor for us, we follow the NIST framework. We're going to map that entire SOC report, identify deficiencies, and then talk to you about that. And then we're also going to review your answers, against our questionnaire to ensure they match up as well, again, to that trust but verify method. So absolutely. And we do have a one of my analysts is dedicated solely to SOC 2 reviews, and then also tracking all of our applicable SOC 2 reports for our high risk vendors.
So Vicky, who's on the webinar here, who asked the question about, following federal standards, NIST sounds like it's the, which we're seeing as well as being the most popular framework that people are mapping against and looking at. So I think it's interesting just from, I guess it would be an opinion side of things. So Seth, you shared with us, you said it's sort of a flow through thing that's occurring. So, you have to do it from a compliance standpoint. And now when you go to your vendors and you start asking them to map against the NIST framework, there's controls in many of those frameworks that basically say you're expected to do third-party vendor assessments on your vendors who have access to sensitive data as well, right? So the question is, if you're a small or mid-sized company, you're going to struggle now with, hopefully you're not going to struggle, because now we're going to get you set up and get you ready based on what we're talking about here. But you've now got to prepare yourself for that. But there is now, things are going to shift where they're also going to have to look at the flow down and ensure that they have things in place on their vendor side, that their vendors are doing the right things as well. Any thoughts on this whole situation and this flow through on the cybersecurity side? We'll start with Seth.
I mean, just to start it, it's real. It's going to happen. It's not, it's not an option of if it's going to happen, it's going to happen. And it's not something that is going to just all of a sudden show up, for example. You're going to see it coming because it's going to start to ripple through. Like we've seen it really start to change where, let's say 5 years ago, 6 years ago, the framework that was most commonly used for a lot of programs was the ISO 27001. And so I guess from an overall framework perspective, to see how the industry shifts, to see what new controls you may or may not be accountable for, I think that is absolutely on its way. I think, like you said, NIST is now becoming kind of the big gorilla in the room. But in terms of how to manage that, you just have to have a program in place. It's not a nice to have anymore. If you want to, get the business and you're going to be able to respond to that RFP, you have to do the assessments. Our company, for example, it's not an option. We're not only contractually obligated, but we're also under various, other government reviews and things like that. Well, they'll come in and they'll validate and they'll want to confirm that we are truly meeting those expectations. And so same process there, right? It's not an expectation on day one necessarily that you're going to have the best third-party risk program in the world.
Right.
But you need to start somewhere. And it's really important that you start with the basics and you really start to put that process in place, because I don't want to say that necessarily you get partial credit, but you're going to be in a lot better stance if you're at least acknowledging where you are and acknowledging what you may or may not have for various stages of a program in terms of maturity. You're going to be in a much better place. So freezing in fear and not doing anything is going to be really bad. It's going to limit your options as a business, and it's really going to close a lot of doors, unfortunately. And that's not good, because we don't want that. We obviously want to support small and medium-sized businesses, because that's kind of how the world turns. So I think it's really important to just start small. What's affordable, and work with your customers to figure out what works best, not only for them, but and why are they asking you for this sort of thing. So the more you can understand why it's being asked, it might make more sense. But then also you might be able to then, like I keep saying, scope what you're doing. So it might not be, for example, all vendors, right? It might only be vendors that are relevant for that specific deal. And then you can start there. And then as you start to grow the program and you start to mature, you can start to incorporate, the other vendors and the other groups. But I think really it's all around understanding why you're doing it, but then also to take, small chunks to really build out that program.
I think that's a great point. It's a smart recommendation. If you agree to one of those security addendums and it's the first one you've ever done with your customer, look, down the supply chain and see who else is involved on your vendor side, and then perform the task there as a starting point. But I think to start off with is get your own house in order and prepare that you're going to be able to provide a proper assessment report back to your customer who asked for it when they do, and then start to prepare and think about the fact that you may have to do the same thing on your vendors as well. That's great. Okay. I'd love to hear from you. This is just a sort of a thought leadership idea from both of you. So, what are some of the key trends that everybody should really understand in this specific space? We'll start with Jenna. Anything that you think that's happening right now, or where the future is going to move to in regards to GRC?
Yeah, absolutely. And I think this was definitely highlighted, obviously, with the global pandemic and everything going on with COVID, and the absolute global movement to work from home would be supply chain and then nth parties. And when I say nth parties, I mean fourth, fifth, sixth parties down the supply chain. So we're seeing quite heavily within our own organization, also within the industry, is now that our customers want us to attest to our nth parties and ensure that they also have the same contractual requirements. And again, it all goes back to tracing that data flow. Do you know exactly where your data is going to be at all times? So I definitely think that supply chain management and nth party management is going to be at the forefront as we continue this, global work from home, and really a dynamic shift of everyone's BC and DR, capabilities. And I think that was definitely tested as well. And that goes absolutely in line with the information security and the cyber risk, because mass movement to work from home. So now we had to go out and attest that all of our vendors that were now, used to be in an office, that we knew exactly where the data was, that are working from home. Well, we now want to know exactly what controls are in that, that home or that cloud environment. So I think that's going to continue as we see a pretty dynamic global shift to the way that we work and then where we work, as well as tracking that supply chain.
Oh, that's a great point. They sent everyone home, and they're all using their personal devices now to access the data without any protection. Hopefully not, but I'm sure that that's the case in many places. All right, over to you, Seth. What do you think? Any thoughts on this GRC, where trends are heading?
Well, I think now it's going to impact everybody. So I think where before it was just a certain group or a certain segment of the overall population of companies, I think now it's across all industries. And I think what's driving it is pretty simple. Everyone's trying to come up with, cheaper, better, faster ways to do things. And it's become the pretty common model that a lot of times, a lot of these different technology scenarios or systems or products, it's easier to outsource it than to try to build it in-house. I mean, most companies, you're not going to build your own solution, right? You're not going to build an Oracle. You're not going to build a payroll system. And so just by default, over time, more and more and more has been outsourced. And I think it's fair to say that how fast things are being outsourced, the catch up from the overall, risk and overall teams that are supposed to be validating and ensuring that the same level of security is being adhered to is still lagging. And I think that catch up is what we're seeing. I think we're seeing a lot of these companies now looking around and realizing that a lot of the control that they used to have, or a lot of the data that they used to control, they no longer control it. But not only are they noticing that they no longer control the data, but now they're being asked by their customers how they control it. And so it's almost like in parallel, the light bulb went on, and we're just paying a lot of people to do a lot of our work now. And then at the same time, you're being asked by your customers that are paying you, that are expecting you to have, like you said before, your house in order. And there's a disconnect, right? There's different variations of disconnect depending on what levels you're at in terms of your third-party risk maturity. But there's still a large gap there between what you're outsourcing, what types of data you currently are outsourcing in terms of control, and how well you're controlling, that vendor risk. And so until that gap is completely closed, or at least very, very small, you're going to see this continue to be a huge, industry leader in terms of growth, because everything from building policies to ensuring that you're adhering to policies. I mean, we see it all the time. There's a lot of vendors, do you have policies? And they answer yes, but they don't. I mean, even the simple pieces like that. So I'd say the GRC function, which was once wasn't that well known, right? GRC, everyone's kind of like, what's GRC? I think now it's becoming its own huge segment in the industry, and it'll continue to grow for a long time until frankly, we all have our arms around it, which it's going to be a long time.
And ever evolving, for sure. Just to touch on this for one more second, which I think we need to address, which is really that, we're reading constantly about the shortage of cybersecurity professionals, right? Like 3 million, shortage. And I think that one of the things people don't realize, and I had a really interesting conversation with a cybersecurity researcher, and we did a podcast and everything. And she shared that one of the biggest challenges, especially in the cybersecurity space, one, the shortage of people, but number two is the shortage of the non-IT technical skill sets in those people that they want to hire. Meaning, there's definitely people out there who have cybersecurity, technical skills, but just listening to this conversation here that we've been having, this is a business conversation. You need to be able to present and communicate and do all these other things as well. So if we have a massive shortage of cybersecurity professionals, and then we also need them to have non-IT skill sets and IT skill sets, or cybersecurity skill sets and non-cybersecurity technical skill sets, I think we're in a tough spot as well. The pressures are going to be pretty heavy. And I'd say that anybody who's, on this webinar who's saying, what direction should I go from a cybersecurity perspective? I think Seth and Jenna will support the fact that this is a huge opportunity. There's a desperate need for people to come into this space. And there's lots of opportunities for growth and employment and so on. Seth, do you agree with that as a statement?
Absolutely. I think, I guess you can call them unicorns. If you can find a highly technical engineer that can sit in front of your board of directors who may or may not have a deep understanding of technology, and they can actually deliver a message that is understood, that's a unicorn. So they are out there, but I would say that it's rare. And I'd say absolutely, I agree 100%. We struggle with hiring. We've become really good at training and trying to educate. Finding a good resource that has a good personality and can work with people and has is just a good overall employee, and we'll try to train them because, like you said, it's hard to find resources that have the specific needs that you're looking for. And frankly, the titles didn't exist years ago. So if you post something like a third-party risk analyst, very, very limited. Maybe the banks have that title. We just started doing that title, frankly. And so before that person or that group was somehow baked into either procurement or somewhere on the supplier side or the onboarding side, and they didn't have that title. And so it's becoming more and more popular now, but that just adds to the complexity of the hiring where until the industry becomes very common, which I think it will be soon because it's just so crazy right now and it's blowing up. But until then, it's even harder with even the basic, LinkedIn searches or various searches on different, job boards. It's people looking for jobs. They might not know what they're looking for because, they don't know what it's called per se at different companies because everyone has a different, way of, whether it be a procurement specialist or a third-party risk specialist or a supplier, So I think until we standardize a lot of these things, it's going to continue to not only be an issue with the lack of resources out there, but I think that will catch up. I think, we typically see that catch up, a few years down the road with the universities and the certifications and the various education, panels and boards start to really push those areas. And I think over time it'll pan out, but it's just so new and various groups, it's hard to find. What you're seeing is a lot of former IT people that are now in the security space, in the last 5-10 years.
Yeah, desperate need. All right, we're coming to the close, but I'm going to do rapid fire here and just give us 3 tips that you would give. And it's obviously not going to be the most important. Maybe they are the most important in your opinion, but give us 3 tips that you would give to a company who wants to improve their cybersecurity. We'll start with Jenna. Give us 3 quick tips.
I would say number 1, understand your current environment. I think that's the biggest thing, and it's absolutely where you need to start. Understand your current environment, do a gap analysis, and then make your strategic roadmap. So I think you have to level set there and understand your current vendor population. Second, I would say leverage the many existing industry standard tools, workshops, and organizations, to really help you build your program. We're members of the Iron Mountain team is members of shared assessments. We're super users, and that's been a great resource. And I've been a member of them, back from my old job in third-party risk as well, before I came to Iron Mountain. So there's many organizations that focus in this area and have a lot of tools that can help you to build your program. And then I think the biggest thing for me, and Seth took my word with unicorn, and I was going to bring it up here. So I would say, make those relationships with your partners. I think that's so incredibly important that you have relationships with the procurement team, the other subject matter experts, the business relationship owners, because that education and that really dynamic shift to a risk-based mindset is really going to, bring your program and then the risk posture at your company so much higher.
Right. Great, thank you. And you just answered Ken's question, who was asking about the various cybersecurity working groups. So thank you. All right, Seth, over to you. 3 tips.
So I think, well, I'll echo what Jenna said in the first one, because I think that's the most important, is you need to really baseline where you're at today. And so you can't just build a program without knowing where you are. So the foundation, right? Building the house, build the foundation first. I think that's the most critical piece, because and then from there, I would say the next stage there is to come up with a strategy. It doesn't have to be the best strategy ever written, but come up with at least an 18-month, because things change so quickly. Come up with an 18-month strategy on the various milestones and steps that you're going to take to get there. Because without that, you're going to just be flailing. Things are going to happen. You get busy. Customers are, asking you for new things, and you're not going to be able to really put in place the foundation that needs to be there. So strategy obviously is very important. And then lastly, make sure you have a champion. If you're not the CEO or you're not the decision maker in terms of funding and budget, make sure you have a champion, or you've already, presented this in a way where the funding's there. Because the worst thing that can happen is you have a strategy and you go to buy a tool, whether it may be a $10,000 tool or $1 million tool. If you don't have the money for it, well, you're dead in the water. And so make sure that strategy you created has been gotten approval and it has funding behind it, because obviously money is very important in terms of putting together an overall program. And then I think the last piece is around the culture in your company. Don't discount what good policies and good training and good education. It's truly going to be instrumental to your success, because you can put in the best security possible, but if your person clicks on it, like you mentioned earlier about the malware, if one of your employees clicks on a link and all of a sudden all your data is locked up, and oh, by the way, it's not backed up, you're dead in the water, right? I mean, you're struggling, if not out of business. And so putting in place that security culture and having a good training and education program and a good understanding across your employees, whether it's 2 employees or 200 employees, in our case, 25,000 plus employees, like it's very, very important to have that administrative piece, the policies and standards and training and education, because that truly is going to help you over time. But it's very difficult to put in place after the fact if you don't already have that in your culture.
Excellent. Thank you. All right, we're coming to a close. I want to thank both of you for joining me. And I think that it's been a great conversation, because we're getting people to understand that assessments are going to be coming their way. It's not going away. Be prepared for it. Get ready. Jenna, Seth, thanks so much for joining us. Appreciate it. I'm going to pass it over to David.
Nice
David, you're going to take it, and a couple quick final things, right?
Great presentation, Seth, Rob, and Jenna. Really excellent content. And, I learned a lot. I know that the audience did as well. Before we go, I want to remind everyone about the resources you see here on the screen, the cyber tips, terms, and talks, and also the cybersecurity quick start guide. You can find both of those over at defendify.io.